It was a quiet evening in the suburbs, the kind of night where everything seemed peaceful and ordinary. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting a soft orange glow over the streets. Cars moved slowly along the roads, their headlights cutting through the growing darkness. In one of those cars sat Lieutenant Marcus Hayes, a decorated military officer who had recently returned from a long deployment overseas. Tired but relieved to be home, he drove carefully, eager to see his family after months of separation. Marcus lived in a modest neighborhood known for its friendly residents and tree-lined streets. As he turned onto the main road, he noticed a police cruiser parked on the side of the street up ahead. It wasn't unusual to see officers patrolling here. It was a safe area, but they still kept an eye out for anything suspicious. Still, something about the sight made Marcus feel uneasy, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. He slowed down slightly, checking his speedometer to ensure he wasn't going too fast. Sure enough, moments later, the flashing blue and red lights appeared behind him. Marcus sighed, pulling over to the shoulder of the road. His heart sank as he watched the officer step out of the cruiser and approach his car. He knew this wasn't going to be pleasant, no matter what happened next. The officer's name was Mark Reynolds, a man with years of experience under his belt, but also a reputation that preceded him. Over the years, there had been whispers around town about Reynolds, whispers that painted him as someone quick to anger and slow to listen. Some said he treated people differently based on how they looked or where they came from. Others claimed he often crossed the line between enforcing the law and abusing his authority, but none of these stories had ever been proven beyond doubt, so Reynolds remained on the force, his badge intact. As Reynolds approached Marcus's car, his expression was unreadable. His uniform was crisp, his boots polished to perfection, but there was a stiffness in his posture that hinted at tension. He tapped on the driver's side window with his flashlight, signaling for Marcus to roll it down. When the glass lowered, Reynolds leaned in, his eyes scanning the interior of the vehicle before settling on Marcus. "License and registration," Reynolds barked, his tone sharp and demanding. There was no warmth in his voice, only a sense of authority that bordered on intimidation. Marcus nodded politely, reaching into his pocket for his wallet and then leaning across the seat to grab the documents from the glove compartment. Every movement was deliberate. He knew better than to make any sudden gestures when dealing with law enforcement. Handing over the papers, he spoke calmly. "Is there a problem, officer?" "I was just heading home." Reynolds barely glanced at the documents before tossing them onto the hood of the car. His lips curled into a sneer as he sized Marcus up, taking in his dark skin and neatly pressed clothes. "You were speeding," he said flatly, though his tone suggested there was more to it than that. "Do you know how dangerous that is?" Marcus blinked, surprised by both the accusation and the dismissive way his belongings had been handled. "I don't think I was speeding, sir," he replied evenly. "But if I was, I apologize. I'll make sure to drive more carefully." His politeness seemed to irritate Reynolds further. The officer crossed his arms, his jaw tightening. "Don't give me that sir nonsense," he snapped. "You pull over like everyone else when we tell you to. Act like you've got some sense." The comment stung, but Marcus bit back his frustration. He reminded himself that arguing wouldn't help the situation. Instead, he tried again. "I understand, officer. I'm just trying to cooperate. Is there anything else you need from me?" Reynolds didn't answer right away. Instead, he began pacing around the car, shining his flashlight inside as though searching for something incriminating. When he found nothing, his annoyance grew. He stopped beside the driver's door once more, glaring at Marcus through the open window. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered abruptly. Marcus hesitated, confusion flickering across his face. "May I ask why, sir?" "You deaf?" Reynolds shot back, his patience clearly wearing thin. "I said get out of the car, now." With no choice but to comply, Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt and stepped outside. He kept his hands visible, palms facing forward, as he stood beside the car. The cool night air brushed against his skin, but it did little to ease the knot forming in his stomach. This wasn't how traffic stops were supposed to go. Not for someone like him who had dedicated his life to serving his country. Reynolds circled him now, his movements exaggerated, almost theatrical. "What's your deal, huh?" he asked, his voice dripping with disdain. "You think you're better than everybody else because you wear that fancy uniform? Think you can break the rules and get away with it?" "I'm not trying to break any rules," Marcus said firmly, his own frustration starting to bubble beneath the surface. "I'm just trying to get home to my family. If I made a mistake, I'll take responsibility for it." But Reynolds wasn't listening. His gaze lingered on Marcus's military insignia, and for a moment it looked like he might say something about it. Instead, he shook his head, muttering under his breath. Then, without warning, he grabbed a crumpled coffee cup from the roof of his cruiser and threw it onto Marcus's windshield. The gesture was petty, almost childish, but it carried a weight far heavier than its simplicity suggested. "There," Reynolds said with a smirk. "Now you've got something to clean up. Maybe next time you'll remember to follow the rules." Marcus stared at him, disbelief etched across his features. Was this really happening? Had this man pulled him over, not for a legitimate reason, but to humiliate him? The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. For all his training, for all the sacrifices he'd made, none of it mattered in this moment. To Reynolds, he was just another faceless target, someone to assert dominance over. And yet, Marcus refused to let his composure slip. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. "Officer," he began, his voice steady despite the storm, raging inside him. "I don't know what I did to upset you, but I assure you I mean no disrespect. Can we please resolve this so I can go home?" For a split second, it seemed like Reynolds might relent. But then his expression hardened and he reached for his holster. What happened next would change both their lives forever. Reynolds' hand hovered near the grip of his holstered gun, and the air around them seemed to freeze. Marcus's eyes widened as he instinctively raised his hands higher, palms open and facing outward in a gesture of surrender. His heart pounded, in his chest, each beat echoing like a drum roll in his ears. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. This wasn't what being pulled over for a minor traffic violation should feel like. "Is there a problem, officer?" Marcus asked, his voice calm but tinged with urgency. He could see the tension in Reynolds' posture, the way his jaw clenched and unclenched as though he were wrestling with some internal storm. "I'm just trying to cooperate." But Reynolds didn't respond, at least not with words. Instead, he took a step closer, his boots crunching against the gravel on the side of the road. The faint hum of passing cars in the distance did little to drown out the weight of the moment. Reynolds' fingers curled tighter around the handle of his weapon, and then, without warning, he yanked it free from its holster. The metallic click of the gun leaving its resting place sliced through the night like a knife. Marcus froze, his breath catching in his throat. Every instinct screamed at him to move, to defend himself, but he knew better. He had trained for years to handle high-pressure situations, to remain composed even when faced with chaos. Yet nothing in his military career had prepared him for this. A man with a badge and a gun pointing it at him for no reason other than the color of his skin. It felt surreal, like something out of a nightmare that refused to end. "Back up." Reynolds barked, his voice sharp and commanding. "Don't make any sudden moves." Marcus obeyed immediately, taking a slow step backward, his hands still raised. "Officer, please," he said, his tone measured but laced with desperation. "I'm not a threat. I'm just trying to understand what's happening here." But Reynolds wasn't listening, or if he was, he didn't care. His focus was razor sharp, his gaze locked onto Marcus as though he were staring down an enemy combatant rather than a civilian who had done nothing wrong. The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on Marcus. Here he was, a decorated officer who had risked his life countless times to protect others, now being treated like a criminal by someone whose job was supposed to be about keeping people safe. As the seconds stretched into what felt like hours, a faint sound broke the tension, a distant chirp of a phone camera capturing photos or video. Neither Marcus nor Reynolds noticed at first. Their attention was fully consumed by the standoff unfolding between them. But somewhere nearby, a pedestrian had stopped to watch the scene unfold. From behind a parked car, they held up their phone, recording silently as the drama played out before them. Back on the roadside, Reynolds continued to escalate the situation. With the gun still pointed squarely at Marcus, he began pacing back and forth, muttering under his breath. Words spilled out, some directed at Marcus, others seemingly aimed at no one in particular. "You think you're so special? Don't, you?" he growled, his voice dripping with contempt. "Walking around like you own the place, acting all high and mighty." "I haven't done anything wrong," Marcus replied, his patience wearing thin despite his best efforts to stay composed. "If you have a concern, let's address it properly. I've shown you my ID, followed your instructions, I'm cooperating fully." "Cooperating?" Reynolds scoffed, stopping mid-pace to glare at Marcus. "You call this cooperating? You're standing there questioning me, talking back like you're above the law. That's not cooperation, that's disrespect." Marcus shook his head slightly, disbelief washing over him. How had things spiraled so far out of control? All he had wanted was to get home safely, to hug his wife and kids after months of separation. Instead, he was caught in a surreal confrontation with a man who seemed determined to turn a routine traffic stop into something far more sinister. Reynolds suddenly stepped forward again, closing the gap between them until the barrel of the gun was uncomfortably close. Marcus flinched involuntarily, his body reacting to the proximity of the weapon despite his attempts to remain stoic. "You want to play games with me?" Reynolds snarled. "Fine, let's see how tough you really are." For a brief moment, Marcus wondered if this was it, if this would be the moment where everything went irreversibly wrong. But just as quickly as the thought entered his mind, it faded. He reminded himself that panicking wouldn't help. Instead, he focused on speaking clearly, choosing his words carefully to avoid provoking further aggression. "Officer Reynolds," he said, his voice steady but firm. "I am Lieutenant Marcus Hayes, United States Army. I've served my country honorably for over a decade. I'm not here to challenge you or cause trouble, I just want to resolve this peacefully." The mention of his rank and service gave Reynolds pause, but only for a second. His sneer returned almost instantly, accompanied by a dismissive wave of his hand. "Military, huh? Big deal. You're not in uniform now, soldier. Out here, you..." "Answer to me." Before Marcus could respond, Reynolds did something that shocked even himself. He grabbed the discarded coffee cup from earlier, the same one he had thrown onto Marcus's windshield, and hurled it forcefully at the car. It bounced off the hood and landed on the ground with a dull thud. The act was petty, almost laughable in its absurdity, yet it carried a chilling undertone. It was as if Reynolds wanted to remind Marcus that he held all the power in this situation, that he could do whatever he pleased without consequence. "You want respect?" Reynolds spat, his face twisted with anger. "Earn it. Until then, you'll do exactly what I say when I say it. Got it?" Marcus nodded slowly, his mind racing. He knew arguing further would only worsen the situation, but the injustice of it all gnawed at him. He thought about his family waiting for him at home, unaware of the danger he was in. He thought about the sacrifices he had made for his country, the lives he had risked to protect strangers. And now here he stood, reduced to a target because of someone else's prejudice. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Reynolds lowered his gun slightly, though he kept it drawn and ready. He gestured toward the car with a jerk of his head. "Get back in your vehicle," he snapped, "and don't let me catch you speeding again, or littering for that matter." The irony of the last comment wasn't lost on Marcus. He climbed back into his car without another word, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the steering wheel. As he drove away, glancing occasionally in the rearview mirror to ensure Reynolds wasn't following him, he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was far from over. Little did he know the stranger with the phone had already uploaded the video online, sparking a chain reaction that would soon bring the entire community, and the nation, to its feet. The night may have ended, but the story was only beginning. The next morning, Marcus Hayes woke up with a heavy heart. The events of the previous night replayed in his mind like a bad dream he couldn't shake off. He had hoped that returning home would bring peace and comfort after months away, But instead, he found himself grappling with a mix of emotions: anger, frustration, disbelief, and even fear. Sitting at the kitchen table staring into a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, he wondered how such an ordinary evening could spiral into something so dehumanizing. His wife Sarah noticed his distant demeanor immediately. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, her voice soft but filled with concern. "Marcus, are you okay? You seem different." He hesitated before answering, unsure of where to begin or how much to share. Eventually, he sighed deeply and recounted the entire incident: the unnecessary traffic stop, the hostile officer, the gun pointed at him, and the humiliating act of litter being thrown onto his car. As he spoke, Sarah's expression shifted from confusion to shock, then to quiet fury. By the time he finished, tears were welling up in her eyes, not just for what had happened to her husband, but for the stark reminder of the world they lived in. "This can't go unanswered," Sarah said firmly, her tone leaving no room for argument. "You deserve justice, Marcus. And if this officer is allowed to get away with treating people this way, who's to say it won't happen again to someone else?" Marcus nodded slowly, though he still felt conflicted. Part of him wanted nothing more than to move on, to leave the ugliness behind and focus on rebuilding his life with his family. But another part, a stronger, more determined part, knew that staying silent wouldn't solve anything. If anything, it would only embolden men like Officer Reynolds to continue abusing their power without consequence. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to Marcus, the video recorded by the bystander had already begun making waves online. Uploaded late last night under the title "Cop Points Gun at Military Officer Over Traffic Stop," the clip spread like wildfire across social media platforms. Within hours, thousands of views turned into millions as users shared, commented, and expressed outrage over what they saw. The footage was raw and unfiltered, capturing every tense moment of the encounter: the aggressive tone of Reynolds, the calm yet frightened demeanor of Marcus, and the absurdity of the coffee cup being hurled at the car. Local news outlets picked up the story shortly after, airing segments that included interviews with residents of the neighborhood where the incident occurred. Many expressed disbelief and anger, calling for accountability. "This isn't the first time we've heard complaints about Officer Reynolds," one neighbor admitted during an interview. "But no one ever thought it would escalate to something like this." Activist groups quickly joined the conversation, amplifying calls for justice. Veterans organizations rallied around Marcus, praising his composure during the ordeal while condemning the treatment he received. Hashtags like "Justice for Marcus" and "Respect Our Heroes" began trending nationwide, drawing attention not only to this specific case but also to broader issues of racial bias and police misconduct. The public outrage grew louder, putting immense pressure on local authorities to take action. At the police department, the atmosphere was tense. Internal Affairs launched an investigation almost immediately, aware that ignoring the controversy would only worsen the situation. Chief Anderson, the head of the department, called an emergency meeting with his senior staff to discuss the fallout. "We have a serious problem on our hands," he said grimly, pacing back and forth in the conference room. "This isn't just about one officer, it's about trust. If we don't handle this right, we risk losing the faith of the entire community." As part of the investigation, several officers were interviewed about Reynolds' behavior. While some remained tight-lipped, afraid of retaliation or rocking the boat, others reluctantly admitted to witnessing troubling patterns in his conduct. One officer recalled a previous incident where Reynolds had pulled over a young black man for allegedly rolling through a stop sign, only to berate him with insults when the driver questioned the ticket. Another mentioned overhearing Reynolds make derogatory remarks about certain neighborhoods, referring to them as trouble zones, based solely on demographics. When Marcus was asked to give a formal statement, he agreed, knowing it was the right thing to do. Accompanied by Sarah and a lawyer recommended by a veterans advocacy group, he sat down with investigators and recounted the events of the night in detail. His account matched perfectly with the video evidence, leaving little room for doubt about what had transpired. Throughout the process, Marcus maintained his composure, speaking clearly and respectfully, despite the emotional weight of reliving the experience. "I'm not here seeking revenge or personal gain," Marcus told the Yao investigators. "I'm here because I believe in fairness and accountability. What happened to me wasn't just wrong, it was dangerous. Officers are supposed to protect and serve, not intimidate and harm. If we don't address this, it sends a message that some lives matter less than others." His words resonated deeply, both within the department and beyond. News outlets highlighted his dignity and poise, contrasting it sharply with Reynolds' actions. Public opinion swung overwhelmingly in Marcus's favor, with many praising him as a symbol of resilience in the face of injustice. Letters of support poured in from strangers across the country, offering words of encouragement and solidarity. Despite the mounting pressure, resistance lingered within the police department. Some higher-ups argued that Reynolds' actions, while inappropriate, didn't warrant termination. They cited technicalities and procedural loopholes, attempting to shield him from severe consequences. However, the tide was too strong to fight against. With the eyes of the nation watching closely, any attempt to downplay the incident would be seen as complicity. In the days that followed, protests erupted outside the police station, organized by local activists and supported by members of the military community. Signs read "Accountability now" and "Protect all citizens," while speakers emphasized the need for systemic change. Among the crowd stood Marcus himself, flanked by fellow veterans and civil rights leaders. Though he had initially been hesitant to step into the spotlight, he realized that his voice carried weight, and that using it could help prevent similar incidents in the future. Addressing the gathered crowd, Marcus spoke passionately about the importance of mutual respect between law enforcement and the communities they served. "I didn't ask for this kind of attention," he admitted, "but if sharing my story can spark meaningful change, then I'll gladly stand here and speak out. No one should ever feel the way I did that night, not because of the color of their skin, not because of who they are." His speech earned thunderous applause, further galvanizing the movement. It became clear that this wasn't just about one racist cop or one unjust traffic stop. It was about addressing deeper, systemic issues that had festered for far too long. The momentum built rapidly, forcing even the most resistant officials to acknowledge that sweeping things under the rug was no longer an option. By the end of the week, the police department announced that Reynolds had been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. While some viewed this as a step in the right direction, others demanded swifter and more decisive action. The battle for justice was far from over, but thanks to Marcus's courage and the collective outcry of countless voices, the wheels of accountability had finally begun to turn. The investigation into Officer Mark Reynolds' conduct dragged on for weeks, each day feeling like an eternity for those eagerly awaiting justice. The police department faced mounting pressure from every direction: protests outside their headquarters, petitions signed by thousands, and relentless media coverage that kept the story alive in the public consciousness. Every delay, every vague statement issued by officials only fueled frustration. People wanted answers, and they wanted them now. For Marcus Hayes, the waiting was excruciating. He tried to focus on rebuilding his life at home, spending time with Sarah and their 2 children, but it was impossible to ignore the constant reminders of what had happened. Reporters frequently camped outside his house, hoping for a comment or reaction. Social media notifications buzzed nonstop on his phone, filled with messages of support, questions about updates, and even some hateful comments from people defending Reynolds' actions. It was overwhelming, yet Marcus refused to let bitterness consume him. Instead, he channeled his energy into advocacy, attending rallies, speaking at community meetings, and collaborating with organizations pushing for reform in law enforcement practices. Finally, after nearly a month of scrutiny, the Internal Affairs team released its findings. The report painted a damning picture of Reynolds' behavior during the traffic stop. Investigators concluded that his decision to escalate the situation, including pointing his firearm at Marcus without justification, constituted gross misconduct. Furthermore, the littering incident, the act of throwing the coffee cup onto Marcus's car, was deemed unprofessional and disrespectful, adding insult to injury. The report also highlighted patterns of similar behavior in past interactions documented by colleagues who had come forward during the investigation. With the evidence stacked against him, the police chief announced Reynolds's termination, effective immediately. "Officer Reynolds has failed to uphold the standards expected of our department," Chief Anderson stated in a press conference. "His actions were unacceptable and have eroded public trust. We must hold ourselves accountable if we expect others to do the same." The announcement brought a wave of relief and celebration among supporters of Marcus and advocates for change. Protesters cheered outside the station, chanting slogans like "Justice served" and "No more abuse." Online, hashtags praising Marcus and condemning racism trended again, reigniting conversations about systemic issues within policing. For many, this felt like a rare victory, a tangible example of accountability being enforced where it mattered. Most, however, the legal battle was far from over. Criminal charges were filed against Reynolds for brandishing his weapon unlawfully and disorderly conduct related to the littering incident. His court date was set for several months later, giving both sides ample time to prepare their cases. In the meantime, Reynolds retreated from public view, reportedly struggling to find work and facing ostracism from former colleagues who feared guilt by association. Rumors swirled that he blamed cancel culture and activist groups for ruining his career, though he made no official statements himself. Marcus continued to play a pivotal role in shaping the narrative around the case. Recognizing the platform he now had, he worked tirelessly to turn personal pain into purpose. He partnered with civil rights organizations to draft proposals aimed at improving police-community relations, such as mandatory de-escalation training, stricter oversight mechanisms, and greater transparency in disciplinary actions. At town hall meetings, he shared his experience not as a victim seeking pity, but as someone committed to fostering understanding and preventing future injustices. One particularly impactful initiative Marcus championed was the creation of a citizen advisory board tasked with reviewing complaints against officers and recommending reforms. This idea gained traction quickly, earning endorsements from local leaders and national figures alike. Critics argued that it might slow down decision-making processes, but supporters countered that meaningful change often required patience and collaboration. Despite his outward strength, Marcus privately grappled with the emotional toll of the ordeal. Nightmares plagued his sleep, replaying the moment when Reynolds pointed the gun at him. Anxiety crept into everyday situations. He found himself hyper-aware of interactions with authority figures, questioning whether he'd be treated fairly. Sarah noticed the changes and encouraged him to seek counseling, reminding him that it was okay to ask for help. Reluctantly, Marcus agreed, finding solace in therapy sessions that allowed him to process his trauma healthily. As the weeks turned into months, the momentum behind the movement inspired by Marcus's case showed no signs of slowing. Schools incorporated discussions about racial bias and systemic inequality into their curricula. Community workshops brought together residents and officers to engage in dialogue, fostering mutual understanding. Even politicians began introducing legislation addressing police accountability, citing the widespread impact of Marcus's story as proof that action was long overdue. When Reynolds' trial finally arrived, it captured national attention once again. The courtroom was packed with spectators, reporters, and activists eager to witness the proceedings firsthand. Marcus took the stand, recounting his version of events calmly but powerfully. His testimony resonated deeply with jurors, many of whom later admitted that his composure and dignity left a lasting impression. Reynolds, meanwhile, struggled to justify his actions under cross-examination, offering weak excuses that failed to sway the jury. After deliberating for 3 days, the verdict came back guilty on all counts. Reynolds received probation and was ordered to undergo anger management counseling and sensitivity training. While some viewed the sentence as lenient, given the severity of his actions, others saw it as a step toward broader accountability. More importantly, the conviction sent a clear message that abuse of power would no longer be tolerated or ignored. In the aftermath of the trial, Marcus reflected on how far he had come since that fateful night. What started as a routine drive home had transformed into a catalyst for change, sparking conversations and inspiring action across the country. Though scars remained, both visible and invisible, he knew that his resilience had made a difference. And as he stood alongside fellow advocates at a rally celebrating the verdict, holding a sign that read, "Respect over fear," he felt a glimmer of hope. Change was possible, and he was determined to keep fighting for it, one step at a time. The months following Reynolds' conviction marked a turning point, not just for Marcus Hayes but for the community at large. The ripple effects of the case continued to spread, touching lives far beyond the small suburban town where it had begun. For Marcus, life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy, though he knew things would never truly be the same. He had stepped into a role he hadn't asked for, one of leadership, advocacy, and resilience, but one that gave him purpose. Reynolds, on the other hand, faded into obscurity. Stripped of his badge and ostracized by former colleagues, he struggled to find stability in his new reality. Some whispered that he blamed the system or cancel culture for his downfall, while others claimed he harbored resentment toward Marcus personally. Whatever the truth, Reynolds retreated from public life, taking odd jobs to make ends meet. Friends and family distanced themselves, uncomfortable with the association. His name became synonymous with accountability, a cautionary tale of what happens when power is abused without consequence. Despite the challenges, Marcus refused to let bitterness define him. Instead, he channeled his experiences into something meaningful. With the support of Sarah and their children, he began writing a memoir titled Respect Over Fear. The book chronicled not only the night of the traffic stop, but also the broader themes of systemic inequality, resilience, and the importance of standing up for justice. Each chapter was infused with raw honesty and reflection, offering readers an intimate look at the emotional toll of racism and the strength required to overcome it. When the memoir hit shelves, it quickly became a bestseller, resonating with audiences across the nation. Readers praised Marcus for his courage and eloquence, hailing him as a voice of reason in turbulent times. Book clubs adopted it as required reading, sparking discussions about race, privilege, and reform. Schools invited Marcus to speak at assemblies, where students listened intently as he shared stories of perseverance and hope. His message was simple, yet powerful. Change starts with empathy, dialogue, and action. The success of the memoir opened doors for Marcus to influence policy on a larger scale. Lawmakers reached out, eager to collaborate on legislation aimed at addressing systemic issues within law enforcement. One of the most significant outcomes was the passage of the Community Trust Act, which mandated de-escalation training for all officers, established independent oversight boards to review misconduct allegations, and required body cameras for every patrol officer. The act was named after Marcus, a testament to his role in inspiring its creation. But perhaps Marcus's proudest achievement was the establishment of the Respect Over Fear Foundation. Funded by proceeds from his book and donations from supporters, the foundation focused on bridging gaps between communities and law enforcement through education, mentorship, and outreach programs. It organized workshops where officers and civilians could engage in open, honest conversations about bias, trust, and mutual respect. Veterans and active duty service members were invited to share their perspectives, fostering understanding between those who wore uniforms and those they served. One particularly impactful initiative launched by the foundation was its Youth Ambassador program. High school students from diverse backgrounds were selected to participate in leadership training sessions designed to equip them with tools to advocate for social justice. These young ambassadors went on to lead projects in their schools and neighborhoods tackling issues like racial profiling, mental health awareness, and civic engagement. Many credited Marcus's story as the spark that ignited their passion for activism. As the years passed, Marcus remained deeply involved in advocacy work, though he balanced it carefully with his personal life. Sarah often joked that he worked harder now than during his military deployments, but she understood how much this mission meant to him. Together, they raised their children to value kindness, integrity, and standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. Their home became a sanctuary filled with love, laughter, and purpose. Marcus's journey wasn't without its struggles. There were days when the memories of that night crept back, uninvited. leaving him restless and uneasy. But therapy helped him navigate those moments, teaching him coping strategies and reinforcing the progress he'd made. He also leaned heavily on his faith and the unwavering support of his family and friends. They reminded him that healing was a process, one step forward, sometimes 2 steps back, but always moving toward growth. On the 5th anniversary of the incident, Marcus stood before a crowd gathered at the same intersection where the traffic stop had occurred. A memorial plaque had been installed there commemorating the event as a catalyst for change. Engraved on the plaque were the words, "Justice through unity," accompanied by a quote from Marcus's memoir. True strength lies not in domination, but in lifting others up. Addressing the audience, Marcus reflected on how far they had come since that fateful night. "5 years ago, I thought my world had ended," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I felt powerless, humiliated and angry. But today, I stand here not as a victim, but as someone who believes in the power of hope and collective action. We've accomplished so much together, reforms, policies, and initiatives that are making our communities safer and fairer for everyone." Wei paused, scanning the sea of faces before him. Among them were veterans, activists, students, police officers, and ordinary citizens, all united by a shared vision of a better future. "This fight isn't over," Marcus continued. "There will always be more work to do, more bridges to build, and more hearts to change. But if we continue to listen, learn, and act with compassion, I know we can create a world where no one has to fear those sworn to protect them." The crowd erupted into applause, cheers echoing through the crisp autumn air. As Marcus stepped down from the podium, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. This moment wasn't just about him, it was about everyone who had joined forces to demand accountability and drive change. It was proof that even in the face of adversity, unity could prevail. In the weeks and months that followed, Marcus continued to inspire others through speaking engagements, interviews, and community events. Yet he never lost sight of the values that had guided him throughout his journey: humility, perseverance, and a steadfast commitment to justice. While the scars of that night would always remain, they served as reminders of how far he and society had come. And so, Marcus Hayes moved forward, carrying the lessons of his past into a brighter future. He knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but he faced it with the same determination that had carried him this far. After all, respect over fear wasn't just a slogan, it was a way of life. And Marcus intended to live it fully, one day at a time.